climate action and center their voices, center their experiences, and center their ideas and solutions. So that's one thing that I'm very hopeful for. But over and beyond that, that the green spaces that we have in Africa, in Kenya, can actually be prioritized, and because that's where indigenous knowledge is, for instance, that's where indigenous wisdom is, and that's ultimately, those are the places where, when we talk about climate change, these are areas that are most affected. And so when I think of some of the conversations that are happening right now that will happen over the course of the next couple of days, I think that there is hope that these conversations will actually drive action, and then there will be declarations that can be followed up on.
Dr. Osano, let me come to you. You've been in the climate space for a very long time, and you're indeed one of the most respected people in this conversation. As you sit here today, and as you listen to the conversations happening in various halls at KICC, are you confident that we are on the right course? And are you happy with what you're seeing so far, seeing and hearing so far?
Yeah, I would say that so far I think it looks good. I'll just start by saying that I took time to go through the exhibitions and saw a lot of new technologies of different kinds. I saw a lot of young people that are really engaged, and I think that's important because part of what the conversation should be is not just about talking, but it's about action. And so I think one thing that has made me really excited is the opportunity that was presented for different innovators, different people with different products to come and showcase, alternative to plastics. We are seeing that. So really, everyone is looking for practical solutions beyond the talking. But I also should say that I think the opening session for the ministerial segment started on the right note. We saw inclusion of young people. We saw indigenous community. We saw civil society giving statements. So I hope, of course, that as we go forward, we are going to keep this inclusive spirit of consultation, because I think it's also time before we have the leaders start to go through the documentation and the draft declaration tomorrow, that they be informed about what the perspectives of different groups are.
These talks have been labeled as talk shops before. I mean, think about it. We've held these talks on almost every major capital in the world. And we are gathered in Nairobi now. And I said early in the morning that later in the year, we are going to go to Dubai. Do you believe that the conversations that we keep having during these forums really trickle down to the communities who are affected by climate change? Are they seeing hope? Or is climate change and the conversation around it becoming a city-only affair?
No, I think it's the talks are important because the talks lead to commitments by governments, and those commitments drive policy and drive really budgeting, for example. So this afternoon, we've just seen the launch of, um, a fund that is supposed to be providing, finances at the grassroots level, what's called FLOCA. And those are important because when it comes to community, if you think about maybe drought in northern Kenya, when they lose their livestock, you need to find solutions when, say, offtake, buying of livestock before they die. Or if you have places where there have been floods and you need to reconstruct some of the infrastructure, like roads and so on. If you don't have funds that can allow you to quickly and flexibly, respond to some of these disasters, then it's a challenge. So I think the talks are important. One, because they direct government policy. Two, there are also spaces where different governments come to talk about. Remember, in some cases, we have, say, transboundary shared resources like water and rivers that go across different countries. And to manage this properly, you need to have countries talking. And so that's why this kind of forums are important. And also keeping in mind that this is the first time that African leaders are coming together to just talk about climate change. It has never happened. And so we expect that the declaration that will come out would also have a very full, strong force to direct African position going towards the next global meeting at Conference of Parties for Climate Change.
And indeed, it is not just Africa, it's actually the world that is looking forward to the Nairobi Declaration. Yeah. Mr. Kilonzo, let me come to you. You come from the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance. and there is the word justice in that mouthful. Do you believe that there is justice in these climate conversations? Are you happy with what you're seeing as far as advancement of policies around climate change are concerned? And in fact, even the funding models that we are proposing, as well as the loss and damage conversations that is happening around the world. Do you believe that there is justice in the conversation?
Thank you so much for the opportunity and for the poignant question that you are posing to me. And I'll say this, first and foremost, this is the inaugural Africa Climate Summit. And we need to put it in context that, one, we needed Africans to have conversations among themselves and to begin to discern a pathway of development that is relevant to their context. And therefore, that begins to drive the first elemental issue around justice in terms of participation. Are Africans participating in this process? Is there sufficient inclusion for their participation across? And have the consultations happen in a consistent manner across the continent? And are the voices of those who are at the front line of climate crisis being well factored within the process? That becomes foundational to the conversation in this particular regard. Of course, we know there has been quite itching issues regarding the inclusion and the participation of these groups in this particular process. Some have been resolved, some are still nagging up to this particular point, and that becomes quite telling in terms of then how do you pursue justice. But I think Africa needs first and foremost to have a conversation with itself. But when you look at the framing of the conference, it's more of an exhibition of what Africa has to offer, meaning that it's an open conversation for the world. So Africa has not galvanized its position so far. And therefore, the extent to which African position that is going to emerge from this particular place, how solid it is and how locked it is within the African context is quite telling right from the onset. I think the agenda itself right from the onset has kept evolving. We do appreciate the president of this republic for keeping listening to what people are saying and essentially beginning to inbuild some certain elements that demonstrate that the conversation can actually truly reflect the aspirations of Africa. I think at the onset, the agenda was heavily dominated with commercial interests. That's something that we must say for a fact. And out of consultations and engagements, some led by Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance, among other actors, we've actually seen a bit of transformation of the program, elements of adaptation coming in, but not sufficiently in a resounding manner as it ought to be. Because we thought this conference, first and foremost, will center around adaptation, which is extremely critical for Africa. And given the fact that all the science and all the evidence, including the IPCC ACT6 report, is actually pointing to the direction that Africa will be impacted under our mitigation scenarios, and our mitigation scenario. And therefore, it points to the needs around strengthening investments around adaptation, which is quite critical. Back to the point of then looking at the adaptation imperative, then we are looking at a conference where African can actually galvanize their voice, push the global north in quite a substantive manner to cut on emission. Africa emissions remain quite far below what is expected, and therefore what would be useful in terms of cutting global temperature is pushing on the global north to cut on the emission. But if we connect the African Climate Summit and the agenda of loss and damage, we can see it's hardly finding its own space. Because beyond the ability of communities to adapt, we know in Africa communities are already suffering irreparable losses and damage. But within the agenda itself, there is no substantive discourse around loss and damage, which again raises serious questions regarding to whether this conference will live to its bidding in terms of building sufficient global pressure for the loss and damage. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Kilonzo. Ms. Sifuna, let me come back to you. Kilonzo raises some really pertinent issues regarding the issue of loss and damage. And around the world, everyone understands that we cannot live the way we are living and survive, at least not for the near future. You come from an organization that agitates for the inclusion of women in this climate conversation. And studies have shown that women are actually the most affected when it comes to climate shocks. They are the ones who have to walk long distances to fetch water, for instance, or who have to till farms that do not yield anything at the end of the harvest season. From what you've seen so far and your interaction with women in this continent, what are the main issues that women suffer now that this climate summit should address, at least by the end of Wednesday this week?
Great, and I appreciate that question because women, as you've said, are disproportionately affected by climate change. When you think of drought, what often comes to mind is pastoralist communities that have to migrate or travel long distances in search of pasture. But we also forget that it's women who, more times than not, are the ones who are moving in search of those greener pastures, in search of food, and they risk their lives as they're moving. So they could be subjected to gender-based violence, to attacks. In cases where communities that are at the front line of floods, it's women who lose their lives because they're the ones who stay behind, but yet have not even been taught how to swim, for instance. And so even the work that we do as She Changes Climate is it's working in tandem, so advocating for women to be included in policies and to be active participants. And we say women in all their diversity, because when we think of women, it's easy to just say men, women, but then there's, almost like hierarchies within the aspect of women. So it's women of color, it's women from indigenous communities, it's women with disabilities, right? And so we are really advocating for these women to be active participants, because it's just one thing to say, let a woman be on a panel or part of a conversation around climate action, but are you giving her a chance to speak? And also, have you brought in a woman who has a lived experience? And so that's one of the things that we're doing. And then also as well, working, and even going back to your question about the communities that are impacted most. So working with women in various communities that are at the front line. And I say amplifying the work that they're doing, not so much empowering, because I feel like empowering sometimes comes from within. So amplifying the work that they're doing, and then taking these case studies to high levels of climate negotiation rooms, the UNFCCC processes, just so that they understand that actually these women are the ones who are driving communities that are affected and driving their resilience. So I think that, the aspect of inclusion really needs to be almost magnified a bit more. Like, what do we mean by inclusivity? And as we explore inclusivity, are we making sure that all people who have historically or previously been left behind are included in the conversation as active participants?
But when you talk about as active participants, what does that mean? And I want to paint a scenario here. I was among a group of people that walked from Nyayo National Stadium to the Green Park bus terminal, just across from KICC here. And among the people who were walking were these indigenous community women from far-flung areas in their colorful traditional robes, dancing and chanting on the streets of Nairobi and saying, enough is enough, we want participation, we are suffering, and we want to be part of this process. But is that enough, really? Is people walking on the streets, dancing in the capitals and chanting and making noise? Is that enough? Or, as Kilonzo says here, should we be looking at, advancing the adaptation mechanisms that we as Africans have developed for a very long time, because we are a resilient community? So, there appears to be a disconnect between what we want to achieve and the processes, the things that we put in place towards achieving that.
Yeah, that's a very loaded question, but I think active participation comes in various forms. That protest alone, that's active participation, and they're using the resources, the spaces that they have available or that have open doors, because the march was open to anyone who wanted to participate, to be an active participant. But over and beyond, just even publicly in that sense, I think it's also just very much in the policy and advocacy rooms where the policies are being drafted. Are you having women with lived experiences or even representatives of the communities or women in communities? And are you giving her or them a platform to actually say, here's what we're going through, here are some solutions that we've actually started implementing, and this is what we need out of it. For instance, county governments need to have this aspect within the policy, and even in climate resilience, how we, sort of dispersing funds, for instance. Are there some for women groups in areas most affected by drought, for instance. So allowing, not even allowing them, opening the door for them to come in, and then just, amplifying, giving them the mic, for instance. Tell us, what is your lived experience? What is your truth? What solutions do you propose based on your experience?
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Osano, let me come to you. As we gather here today and for the next few days, a lot of eyes are on us and on this Nairobi summit. And, the Nairobi declaration that comes from these talks is expected to amplify and take the African stand at the COP28 later in the year. From where you sit, what do you think would make Africa have a united, one voice? Let me not call it a united voice, but one voice in Dubai later in the year. What should be the rallying call from the Nairobi Declaration?
There are more than 50 countries in Africa. So it's always not the easiest thing to get Africans to speak with one voice, because different countries are at different stages of development. Some countries, for example, high emitters. Some countries have low emission. Some countries have high poverty level. Some are not. But I think there are basically a few fundamental things. One is, of course, now we do know that collectively historically Africa has not really contributed so much to global warming, to emission of greenhouse gases. Number two, we know that even the current levels of contribution of emission from African countries collectively, it is not that much. It's about 4.8%. But number three, which is most important, is that a majority of countries in Africa are facing development challenges, high poverty levels, a high population of young people that need employment. These young people would have to be employed under what we call a low carbon economic pathway. We don't have template for that because African countries have to develop differently from the Western nations. So grow income while at the same time avoiding emission. So if you're talking about industrialization, it has to be a different kind of industrialization. A lot of countries in Africa are currently facing debt distress. In fact, according to the World Bank, 31 out of 37 highly indebted countries in the world are in Africa. So you have a very high level of fiscal constraints. If you look around, a lot of African countries have what we call infrastructure deficit. You still have to invest in roads for transport. You still have to invest in agro-processing for industries. You still have to invest in telecommunication, railways, ports, and so on. And the question is, where are these governments going to get the public revenue to be able to get the capital for this kind of investment? And that becomes a question which connects to the issue that my colleague here, Philip, was talking about, because you are having countries having to face a future where climate change is already undoing some of the development gains. They don't have the space to have capital to invest, and they're facing high levels of debt. So it has to be a question of, and this has been part of the discussion, to see development and climate action as two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
Because you can't choose either, and that's why adaptation is very important, because without doing anything, African countries have to find the means and the resources to be able to adapt. And also one of the things that brings a lot of African countries together is just understanding the vulnerability. When you talk about vulnerability, is that a lot of economies of African countries are highly dependent on climate-sensitive sectors. If you look at agriculture, for example, in this country, about maybe 60 to 70% of employment is in agricultural sector. Agriculture contributes to a very large share of the GDP, but we see what happens every other time. We have climate extremes, we have floods. When you have drought, we lose a lot of livestock. When you have floods, you lose a lot of crops and so on. So those three things really make it possible, and we're already seeing that that's one way in which many countries in Africa can now come with very strong voice, speak about, one, the need to have a financial system that can actually respond, allow them to respond to address some of these challenges. But I also wanted to speak about one thing which is important, I think, which I'm expecting personally from this summit, is also to bring science back to the heart of the discussion. I think as we go along, we haven't also put in a lot of emphasis in terms of investing in science and research. Yet we know that now with climate extremes, governments need to have early warning systems. So if we don't have a network of, say, rainfall gauges and so on, it becomes very difficult because it's like you are groping in the dark. You think something is going to happen, but you don't actually really know whether it's going to happen. And that's why it's important to bring the research and the science part.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Osano. Let me, as we wrap up, because we don't have much time, let me come to you, Mr. Kilonzo. And I'm going to ask the same question. Do you believe that the African contingent that is gathered here today is likely to come up with a strong Nairobi declaration in the lead up to the COP28 talks later in the year? And if so, what do you foresee as the contents of that Nairobi declaration? As we wind up, we have about 2 minutes to go.
Yes, sorry, I missed the element of what do you want them to come up with?
What do you think will be part of the document that we craft here, which we are labeling the Nairobi Declaration, and which we hope as Africans we are going to take to COP28 later in the year?
Thank you so much. I think definitely a convening of such nature will come out with an output that is resounding and that is important. And probably as a point of reflection, it is important that such a document does not in any way erode or negate any gains that Africa has made within the negotiation space. So even as we begin the process, as part of the broad principles that should actually overact the whole process of its development, it should not negate in any way any gains, any progress that Africa has made within the negotiation space, because it takes quite a milestones to negotiate that process. But we are looking at a document that begins to galvanize the interests of Africa, both at the executive level and also at political level, to build much more global pressure on the leaders, particularly leaders of the North, to cut on their emissions. Because if Africa is going to be impacted under all mitigation scenarios, then it means unless we are able to galvanize our energies and push for a document that achieves that, then we lose it.
All right. Thank you. Sorry for cutting you short, Mr. Kilonzo. I am afraid we have to bring it to an end. It's an heated conversation, just starting to get really interesting. Thank you very much, Mr. Kilonzo from the Pan-Africa Climate Justice, Ms. Natalie Sifuma from the She Changes Climate, and Dr. Philip Osano from the Stockholm Environment Institute. Thank you very much for having us and for engaging in this conversation with us. Back to you in studio. Thank you. Let's listen to the President. Thank you.
Either suppliers or programs roll out, and now I am going to add you more money. So my request to you is let us make sure that we roll out our programs. We
have the governance.
I can do what I have to do. So that is my request to you, because as I push the people in Treasury, they normally remind me, tell your colleagues to spend the money. We are spending too much money guarding it at the central bank. So please, if we can all do that, it will be very good. I wish I was in your situation where somebody is telling me spend money. So let me say again, when I had a conversation with the Council of Governors on this subject, and the chair and her team came to see me, we were very clear on what we need to achieve. And I am very happy that in the backdrop of this Africa Climate Summit, we are rolling out our own Kenya Summit that takes these resources to the lowest level possible. Thank you very much. Let me ask, on behalf of all of us, my brother, the President of Sierra Leone, Julius Bayo, to just make some small comments. I know I didn't prepare him that he was going to make any comment, but let me request him to close this for us, make some comments, because we have a journey to travel with him as we build the coalition that will bring renewable energy intervention into our continent. My brother, Mr. President, welcome.
Your Excellency and dear brother, I'm here to support you for a great initiative, and we are proud of you and Kenya, and we will support you fully. Without much ado, I want to congratulate you, my brother and friend, President Ruto, for successfully launching this innovative initiative. This is a great example of a homegrown solution to global problems. When the world creates a mess, we have to find a way at home to solve them. No excuses, because we are an integral part of the world. We all know how much climate change is impacting and ravaging our communities in several respects that I don't need to even mention here today. I do not doubt that the financing locally led climate action program will benefit millions of Kenyans and lay a solid foundation for robust climate adaptation efforts over the next decade. And this is where I will appeal as we all look at this initiative as an example that Kenyans take this seriously, because we want to follow, but it depends on how well it is going to work here. We hope our development partners, who have done so well in supporting Kenya, we also support other African nations. Across our continent, we are experiencing definitely a heart-wrenching tales from increased storm surges, especially in Sierra Leone, flash floods, drought, high winds that are accompanied by pollution, landslide, mudslide, as we experienced some years ago. For us in Sierra Leone, these are not merely stories, but stern warnings. We are at a crossroad in making tangible decisions to move from policy statements to taking concrete action to combat this global menace of climate change. Transformative actions taken by the Kenyan government to reduce community-led vulnerability and build resilience to climate change impacts through the FLOCA initiative is a laudable step from policy to action. Sierra Leone is among 20 of the most vulnerable nations in the world to the effects of climate change. The impact of climate change is real for us, and we continue to experience all the things that I've spoken about: biodiversity loss, deforestation, coastal erosion, mudslides, etc. In Sierra Leone, if we do not act on time, we definitely lose valuable ecosystems and its attendant problems of displacement of people, and also loss of livelihood. My government recognizes the threat posed by climate change and has taken necessary steps and actions to minimize the potential for further damage. Our actions in Sierra Leone respond directly to the overall objective of the UNFCCC's National Adaptation Plan guidelines for reducing vulnerability to the impacts of climate change by building adaptive capacity and resilience of the country, and facilitating the integration of climate adaptation into relevant existing and new policies, programs, and activities. Our initial NAP also gives guidance and provides information on action to reduce climate change vulnerability regarding water resources, agriculture, and food security, public health, coastal zones, and communities across the country. We are implementing a coordination and reporting mechanism for all climate-related activities and projects of government, ministries, departments, and agencies to facilitate and coordinate the country's climate change programs and projects to be developed in line with national programs and the SDGs and outcomes derived from the UNFCCC process. The range of adaptation options has been well defined through systematic and bottom-up national level consultative processes. The process has been a significant achievement in raising awareness, building technical and institutional capacities, and integrating adaptation concerns into national development dialogues. I look forward to bilateral South-South cooperation with our friends in Kenya to undertake the necessary assessments and formulation of a similar program in the near future. I'm already following in your footsteps. So make sure you step properly so I know where to step after you. We hope our donor partners will be encouraged to support this learning model among African nations. Such cooperation could shorten the time for design of various programs. It could also help countries move faster in developing bankable projects to crowd in more significant private investment flows. Thank you.
Let's take our seats. I think we still have some assignment to do there. Let me just put in a good word for my good brother, President of Sierra Leone, and ask our partners to be as generous when they come calling. And I promise you, my brother, that I will steady the steps so that you know where surely to step. And to thank you very much for that. Let me also recognize my good elder brother, Nangolo Mbumba, the Vice President of Namibia, representing my good friend. Thank you very much for hosting me when I came to Namibia, when I was Vice President, and for allowing a member of your family to fly me. Please say hello to her. And so thank you very much for that. I think we can now move on with the rest of the program. Asante sana.
We'll now move on to the launch, and I'll request that we have just the leadership to join His Excellency the President, and I'll count down from 5 for us to now have the unveiling, but we'll do that for the sake of photographs. Let's have them there. Then after that, we'll hand over the check. So I'll count down. We press the buzzer for the unveiling. And for the sake of the cameras, I'll request that those of us who possibly are taking pictures, let's give clear sight to the cameras at the back so that we are able to also have the other millions of people watching able to witness this happening today. So with that, we will now have that done. So Your Excellency, the President of Kenya, will ask you to press the buzzer in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. There's some confetti, so there you go. A warm round of applause. That is a milestone, a huge milestone that has now been achieved. Wonderful. And with that, Your Excellency, I'll request that we just come back to our seats, and to come on stage, I'll request His Excellency Dr. William Samoei Ruto to come on stage, His Excellency Julius Maada to also come on stage, His Excellency Rigathi Gachagua, His Excellency Nangolo Mbumba, the COG Chair, Her Excellency Anne Waiguru, then the partners who are involved in this, as we now are going to receive the check. We have Germany, Denmark, Sweden, Netherlands, and World Bank. It's going to be a big picture, a family picture. So let's also have the check presented so that we may have the evidence that it is there. Let's also have the CS for Treasury, Prof, to come also be part of this picture. All right, so it's not meant to be seen. No, not now. It has to be displayed. It has to be displayed when it is requested. But isn't this the time to display it? And the president has to verify that it is actual money. There you go. Yes, verified.
Zainab, we were saying I was.
Well, thank you so much. We've just caught wind, as we expect or as we await the Nairobi Declaration on the third day of this summit. We've just caught wind of a document from the African civil society. And some of the key things that they happen to mention, actually I'm going to just read them out to you in brief. They happen to mention that Africa is the least responsible for climate change. Africa has faced centuries of oppression. Africa faces immense climate-induced challenges. We cannot secure climate justice within the boundaries of a broken system. We need a reversal of global financial flows. So those are some of the preambles that they are expecting will be addressed by the end of this summit. Leon, maybe do you have anything else to add regarding what the African Climate Civil Society happened to mention?
Yes, I do. And interesting enough, remember at the end of this event, of the 3 days, we shall be expecting the Nairobi Declaration to be made. But this document, they have titled it the African Declaration. And what caught my attention was the false narratives that they are rejecting. And they state 8 narratives they say that are false, according to them, and that they're rejecting them. Number 1, fossil fuels. They say fossil fuels must remain in the ground. And number 2, on carbon markets. They say carbon markets and carbon offsets, which are in reality pollution permits, must immediately cease. Number 3, they reject geoengineering, and according to them, it represents the ultimate dangerous destruction and must firmly be rejected. On number 4, they reject green hydrogen. Remember, if you watched M-Live in the morning, Mr. Mohamed Ado was explaining that hydrogen is basically we extract hydrogen from water and then we export it back to the global west. So they're rejecting that. Number 6, we have dangerous new technologies and techno fixes. Number 7, we have debt restructuring and incremental financial reforms. And number 8, we have export-led growth and extractive industries. So I think these are very interesting points. I'll just be waiting to see what experts and our leaders decide on them.
Very much so, Leon, actually. I do agree. And when we talk about Africa is the least responsible for climate change, even speaking to the youth behind us, those are some of the key things that they also happen to mention, that in a day and age when we're headed to COP28, Africa omits less than 10% of carbon emission, yet we are also suffering adversely from the effects of climate change when we have the global north also expected to either come to the table. We're expecting them to see whether they'll come to the table to see if we can be able to reach a solution when it comes to even climate financing, when it comes to carbon emission, and even in the carbon markets as well. We're also joined by our able editor, Zainab Wandati. Zainab, what is your thoughts when it comes to matters sustainability, climate adaptability, and now with this conference here being in Africa, we are told we are the least emitters of carbon in globally. but right now we still suffer adversely from this effect. What is your thought on that?
I believe it's a very timely thing for this summit to come in Kenya. And about what's going on behind us, there's a concert here that started off with a march earlier in the day, a group of civil society groups and young people from around the continent marching against the climate injustices that Africa faces. So this concert here, Juliani is among the artists who's going to be headlining it, and they're going to be using art to tell the climate story. Through music and poetry. There's a spoken word artist, I'm told, who's been lined up for it to rally the African people against climate change. And that's why you see a lot of young people here, because art is one way through which young people communicate. And there's always that perception, that feeling that young people do not agree, do not understand when they're told about climate change. So what better way than to get people who speak their language to come and tell them this message in their own words. But I believe, I'm hopeful that this summit will bring us something good, because the COP, we always go and talk. Like if you look at the loss and damage kit, it took 30 years to get that kitty agreed to. So Kenya is trying to do something that's not been done before. Let's wait and see. Maybe we don't have to wait another 30 years for it to happen.
Absolutely. Amazing. Well, before we hand over to the panel discussion that's ongoing at KICC, expect more from the NTV team, right, Zainab?
Yes. What should they expect? Yes. We have the whole sustainability team is out. We had Joe Ageo and Bernard Mwinzi at KICC leading some of those panel discussions there. We had you and Leon out in the field. We have Helen Shikanda out in the field. Kevin Mutai is also joining this coverage, but remotely, and Sisi Siago from the coast, all joining this coverage. So today in the newspaper, you saw 7 pages of coverage, of climate coverage. But that's not all. We are not done. We are not done yet. There's still a lot more to come. So tomorrow there'll still be more coverage coming up. And tomorrow actually is a very busy day at KICC, I should say. President William Ruto will literally spend the whole day at KICC. He has so many presidential panels to be involved in. And these are panels that are trying to lead discussions in different directions in line with the agenda of the summit. So we will be following those discussions that the president will be involved in and see how it adds to Kenya's agenda. Today, right now, actually, he's at KICC launching a unit of a FLOCA project, delivering money to some of these counties that have been pre-qualified. So we have someone there again following that. And then tomorrow we pick up the conversation.
All right. Absolutely amazing. There you have it. There's going to be much more from us, from NTV team, for the 3 days that are yet to come. And if you're a youth, you're watching us from back at home, please make your way to the Green Park as the youth are gathering here for the youth involvement in the Climate Action Summit. Well, that's been all from me. My name is Helen Aura, and many have actually asked whether Leon and I coordinated how we were dressed, the same in black and white.
Not even tell us we'll work together today.
But it was just so happened to be in the spirit, and here we are. See you tomorrow. Do have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you.
For listening today, and I will hand it over to William, who will introduce the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful panel. Things are running late today, and we do apologize. Please give a round of applause to what was a very distinguished panel as they resume their seats. Thank you so much, Andrew, Lamine, Angela, and Ariel, for those important points. As we've been talking all along, all these different pieces need to work together in order for carbon markets to develop at the ambition and the scale that we want to. Now, ACME was literally born at COP27. And at COP27, ACME made a number of promises. What you have been hearing throughout this session today is how ACME has been keeping those promises. And when we were launched at COP27, we had a goal that every promise that we made at COP27 would be achieved at COP28. And I'm really glad that you've all had a chance to hear that. And then we have a very important speaker, and I do thank him for his patience and for his humility in waiting, because obviously he's an incredibly busy person. And this is none other than Ambassador, His Excellency Ambassador Majid who is the director of COP28. Please give him a round of applause as he approaches the stage and gives us his remarks as we close.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today. It's always difficult to close out after so many expert speakers, those who've made such a difference in the carbon markets world, and I hope I'll do my best to keep up with the expertise that we've seen today and the wonderful people who've contributed to this process. Excellencies, colleagues, thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this discussion. The COP28 presidency firmly believes that carbon markets, voluntary carbon markets, are an important, as yet underutilized tool in delivering climate action. With only 7 years remaining to rein in emissions and keep 1.5 within reach, we need every tool at our disposal. Our goal here must be to resolve the issues that are holding us back and from using all the tools in our toolbox. VCMs, which span both the energy transition and climate finance, are an important part of the COP28 action agenda. VCMs can contribute to climate mitigation by disincentivizing actions that would otherwise lead to higher emissions, or by incentivizing those that reduce emissions. Examples of this include reduced deforestation, supporting the transition to more efficient cook stoves, or facilitating the uptake of clean energy technologies. It also includes efforts to boost the removal or sequestration of CO2 through reforestation, incentives to foster the protection and expansion of ecosystems, or through direct air capture. According to the IPCC, VCMs could play a major role in funding the removal of 3 to 4 gigatons of global emissions by 2030. Aside from mitigation, VCMs can also drive important environmental, social, and economic co-benefits. This includes protecting biodiversity, improving soil and water, and boosting jobs and livelihoods for local communities. On the finance side, credible and high-integrity carbon markets can help mobilize flows of cross-border financing, particularly to the Global South. There's also complementarity between VCMs and Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, with clear opportunities to harmonize country and corporate level financing. However, to achieve their potential, we must first reconcile the reality that in their current form, carbon markets face a crisis of confidence. A lack of unified, commonly agreed standard is undermining their integrity and diminishing their value. Our primary objective must be to restore confidence in carbon markets and to ensure that the highest integrity standards are firmly in place and actively implemented. On this point, allow me to recognize the role of the African Carbon Markets Initiative, ACMI, together with African governments, for the leadership in establishing regulatory environments that are conducive to private investments. And this is only a fraction of what is possible. The carbon market opportunity in Africa is significantly under-realized, with less than 2/3 of Africa's credits coming from only 5 countries, and with almost all projects focused on just 2 sectors, energy and forestry land use. This leaves significant room for growth. If developed with a focus on integrity and credibility, VCMs could boost critical climate finance and support green growth and development. This can help deliver multitudes of climate action across a range of sectors, including adaptation, decarbonization, biodiversity protection, and more. The COP28 presidency welcomes the continued effort efforts by ACMI and partners to develop and scale up high-integrity carbon projects. And we support the ambitious goals of the ACMI to raise the quality and integrity of African credits and mobilize up to $6 billion annually by 2030 and $120 billion by 2050. Colleagues, the sheer scope and scale of the climate challenge is such that we need trillions, not billions. And the reality is that none of us can foot such a bill alone. We need every dollar working towards a low-carbon, climate-resilient future that we all aspire to. Voluntary carbon markets are an important piece of this puzzle and have the potential to unlock otherwise untapped resources. We need to work together to scale up high-integrity carbon markets, including more carbon market activation plans at a national level. We need to foster closer collaboration with private sector partners and encourage investment in high-quality transactions, particularly those that prioritize the participation of local communities. And we need to continue to align VCM integrity efforts with those to operationalize Article 6 to ensure synergies of public and private investments. By uniting your expertise, resources, and influence, we can establish, implement, and deploy a framework that ensures integrity, transparency, credibility, and accountability for voluntary carbon markets. By harmonizing efforts, acting in unity, and focusing on integrity, the potential of this tool can be realized. And this will bring us closer to our ultimate goal of delivering transformative progress against the Paris Agreement. Excellencies, colleagues, friends, the COP28 presidency appreciates the efforts of the African Climate Markets Initiative and its partners in furthering this discussion. We look forward to further outcomes to help drive integrity in VCMs, and we look forward to working with each of you to push forward this process and to help bring this unique and potential game-changing resource to fruition. Thank you so much.
I would really like for us to appreciate the remarks of His Excellency Ambassador Majid Al-Suwaidi, not just because he is representing what will be possibly the biggest COP ever, but also for his strong endorsement of the African Carbon Markets Initiative, but most importantly for his humility and patience in waiting for us in what has been a delayed session. Please give him another round of applause and appreciate him. So this brings us to the close of our session. I want to thank all of you for sitting through this. We have heard everything that needs to work, needs to be gotten right in order for carbon markets to work at the scale and ambition that we would like them. I would like to thank all our distinguished panelists, speakers, all those working in the background to make this successful, and all of those who have helped to spread the message of the African Carbon Markets Initiative. I assure you that this is a worthy cause for Africa, and I assure you that this will be successful this time around, Andrew. I heard your remarks loud and clear. This time it will be successful because we've got all the actors in the room and we're all working towards the same goal. Thank you very much for an excellent session, and may you have a pleasant rest of your summit. Thank you.